That's okay. We're starting with John chapter 21. This is going to be a new chapter, and this happens to be the last chapter in the gospel. But we won't be finishing it tonight. So when we finished last week, we were talking about Jesus' second appearance to the disciples when Thomas was there, right? Well, now this is going to be his third appearance to the disciples. So we're going to start with 21 verse 1. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise he showed himself. Now when it says the Sea of Tiberias, it's also called the Sea of Gennesaret, and it's also called the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus had told them, when he saw the woman, he said, "Be not afraid, go and tell my brethren that they go into Galilee, and there shall they see me." So they're obeying him. They went to Galilee. And the most likely place where they went, it's kind of a big area, is Capernaum. And we're going to find out why, because they end up fishing, and that's where Peter and James and John, that was their home. So it's a logical place, and it was a headquarters for Christ's ministry. And Jesus, on this place where he's asked to meet them, he performed like 33 miracles on the sea and around the Sea of Galilee. Remember, he walked on water. He fed the 5,000 near one shore. Peter walked on water. He calmed the waves. So he did a lot of miracles around this place. Now, they end up going fishing, but some people criticized them for that. They thought, well, they should have just been waiting there for Jesus. But I don't criticize them. And you know what? When Jesus appears, he doesn't either. He doesn't say one negative thing about it. In fact, he helps them. So he wasn't upset about that. You got to imagine they're waiting around, and sometimes you just need to do something. When you have anxiety, you need to just get busy and do something. And these guys, that was their livelihood. Before they left their nets, they were professional fishermen. That's how they supported their families on this lake, and they knew this lake. But they'd gone there by the commandment of Christ. Verse 2, there were together Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, that means the twin, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Okay, so it ends up that there's 7 of them. Verse 3. So Simon Peter is the idea man. He comes up with a big idea. Everybody was probably saying, we need to do something, but they're all kind of afraid to speak up. Peter wasn't afraid. He said, I'm going fishing. And they said unto him, we also go with thee. And they went forth and entered into a ship immediately. They were just waiting. They wanted to do something. They didn't want to just sit around and be bummed out because Christ hadn't showed up yet. So they thought, we'll go do something. This is what we know. We know fishing. And that night they caught nothing. How do you think they happened to have boats? That's right. It doesn't say they went to Capernaum, but I think they went there because when they left their boats, their family would have maintained them. Now, what I'm going to do right now is read the account in Luke when Jesus called them right on the shores of this lake. And something that happened then is so similar to this, and I want to make a comparison. And it's going to be Luke 5, 1 through 11. That's Luke 5, 1 through 11. And it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him, Jesus, to hear the word of God, he stood by the lake Gennesaret. That is the Sea of Galilee. And he saw 2 ships standing by the lake, but the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, that's Simon Peter. And he asked him that he would thrust it out from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Part of the reason was that people were thronging him, so he needed to get away by himself so he could teach them. And another thing is that water reverberates sound. So it was a way of making his voice known to everybody. Now, when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answering said unto him, But Master, we toiled all night and have taken nothing, just like this night. Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. So like Peter's thinking, look, we're expert fishermen. This is what we do for a living. We fished all night. There's no fish biting, or we're not going to be able to get any fish in our nets. But yet, he still says, at your word, I will do it. That obedience is so important, and the obedience comes again in the passage that we're teaching on in John. And when they had done this, they caught a great multitude of fishes, and their net broke. And they beckoned unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both ships, so that they began to sink. Just think how many fish that would be. To sink 2 ships. It had to be the dream of a lifetime. You know, every fisherman has their fish story where they catch a fish that's this big. But they caught so many fish that filled 2 boats. Just think how exciting that would be for professional fishermen. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. He realized who this was, that this was a miracle. This had never happened before. For he was astonished, and all that were with him, and the catch of fishes which they had taken. And so was also James and John, the sons of Zebedee. So now we have Peter, James, and John. They were all together, and those 3 are also together here in John. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, for from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought their ships to the land, they forsook all and followed him. And it was because of this draught of fish. That's what convinced them. And that's a beautiful saying there, I will make you fishers of men. There's a lot of songs about that. And they did. They did become fishers of men. But there's a lot of comparisons to this story. Another thing that's interesting is that they waited till nighttime. So I'm assuming in both of these stories, they fished at night. That must have been a good time to catch fish. That's all I can think of. I don't know why they'd be doing it at night, but this is what J. Vernon McGee says about the story in John, where they're fishing all night and not catching anything. They fished all night and caught nothing. This may be the only true fish story that has ever been told. Dr. Gene Scott calls it the failure of the experts. Now, these men fished all night and caught nothing. They had been restless before, and now they are restless and frustrated. It's easy to fish when you catch fish, and frustrating when you don't. They knew how to fish. That's the way they made their living. But that night of failure was in the plan and purpose of God for them. So in my opinion, God just caused those fish to avoid that net. It was his plan that they weren't going to catch any fish that night, because he was actually going to be going fishing with them. Verse 4. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. And I think there's a lot of reasons. It could be because it's morning, and it's a lake, and there's fog. They're not that far apart, though, because Jesus speaks to them, and they answer. So I think they're about 100 yards apart. Verse 5, Then Jesus said unto them, Children, do you have any meat? What he's basically saying is, in the speak of that day is, hey guys, do you have any fish? Did you catch anything? And they answered no. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. Now, this is a familiar story. He's telling them they're going to find fish. They cast, therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. They couldn't even hoist it up into the boat. That was impossible. There were so many fishes.
I have a question.
Sure.
This story, this story and the one you read before, they're the same story but written by one by Luke and one by John.
No, they aren't. They're different stories.
Oh, they're different.
One is their calling. When they were called to be disciples, remember I said they left their nets, they left everything and followed him. So what I'm trying to tell you is that happened when they were called, and then this happened when Christ appeared.
Okay. Yeah.
So they are two different stories.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the other story, the net broke. In this story, the net doesn't break. And I want to tell you something about that. When Jesus called them, the law was still in force. And so when that net broke, some of those fishes got away. But in this story, because now they have the gospel and they're going to be fishing for men, their nets won't break. Now I want to tell you something. He said put it on the right side. You know, there's something about the right in the Bible that's right. It's honored. Where does Jesus sit?
On the right.
On the right hand of God, right? Now he says, cast your nets on the right side of the boat. Okay, there's a lot of this in the Bible. When the angel of the Lord came to Zechariah, which was John the Baptist's father, when he was in the temple, he was at the altar of incense, and you know what it says? The angel of the Lord appeared on the right side of the altar of incense. Now they could have just said he appeared at the altar of incense, but it didn't. It said the right side. And then when Jacob had his last son, Benjamin, his beloved wife Rachel, after she gave birth, she was dying, and she named him Ben-Oni, which means, Ben means son, son of my sorrow. Well, after she passes away, he changed his name. You know what he changed it to? Benjamin, and that means son of the right hand. So what I'm left isn't bad. It's just that right is a place of honor. And I'm going to tell you one more story where this really comes out. When Joseph was bringing his two sons to his father Jacob for a blessing, Ephraim and Manasseh, his younger son Ephraim on his right hand and his older one Manasseh in the left hand, and brought him to his father. And that way, his father's right hand would be on the oldest. Okay, but you know what old Jacob did? He crossed his hands, and he was going to give the right hand to the younger son. And Joseph said, not so, father. He took his hand off of Ephraim's head. He says, not so. He's not the oldest. And Jacob said, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. He said, Manasseh will be a great nation too, but Ephraim's going to be greater. So the right hand, what I'm trying to say, the right hand was a hand of blessing. So I know I went off on a real rabbit trail here about right, but when you see that in the Bible, you're going to know, just like Jesus sitting at the right hand of God, right is something that's honored. And when you think about it, it's part of the word righteousness. It's righteousness, right? Right?
Right.
Now we're going to verse 7, and we're back in John 21. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, and who was that?
John.
That was the Apostle John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now, how do you think he knew that? Because of the fishes. It's like he remembered, wait a minute, this happened before, and we knew it was God, and now it's happening again. So he was the first one to recognize, wait a minute, we got all these fishes, because that guy said, put our net on the other side. It's the Lord. It's the Lord. And you got to look at something. He gave them instructions, and they obeyed. And he gives us instructions, and we need to obey those. Think about it. They had to take their nets and put them on the opposite side of the way they were fishing. that's a lot. They'd have to get their nets out. Of course, they were empty. Put them in the boat and then put them on the other side. But they did it. Gotta give them credit for that. They did it. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his fisher's coat unto him, for he had removed it, and did cast himself into the sea. He's like, "It's Jesus, I'm there." He just jumps out, he puts on his coat, he jumps out, and he starts swimming. You gotta love his enthusiasm to see Christ. Verse 8, and the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from land, but as it were 200 cubits. That's 100 yards. That's why Jesus could talk to them. They weren't that far out. Dragging the net with fishes. You see, they never were able to get the nets in the boat. And this little boat is like a skiff that they would tie on so that to their big ship, so that they wouldn't have to dock that ship every time they wanted to come in. They could just get in this little skiff. And so they were dragging the nets because they were never able to get them up. Okay, so now we are to verse 9. As soon then as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Now what's really great is that Jesus had this all figured out. He went fishing with them, really, because that's how they got the fish. But he already in advance he made bread. He had bread made, he had fish on the fire, on the coals, and he did this in advance to be prepared for them. And that's what he does for us. Mm-hmm. We think, oh, wow, this all just happened. No, he thought ahead of time and prepared things for us for the time that we need them. He will fill our hunger spiritually. Verse 10, Jesus said unto them, bring of the fish which ye have caught. You know, that's really nice. He's not just providing everything for them. He's saying, look, he knew what a big deal it was and how excited they were about these fish. Come on, let's have joy together. You bring what you got, what you toiled for. You bring that and we'll share together. He could have provided all the fish they needed. In fact, he provided those fish. But he wanted it to be a mutual meeting. And that's the way it is with us. He wanted to sit there by the fire. He wanted to talk with them. He wanted to eat with them. He wanted to be with them. And that's what he wants with us. Fellowship. That's what he wants. You know, when he came, they might have still even thought he was going to set up his kingdom on earth. They might have still thought that. Because, hey, now he's risen from the dead. No one can kill him. So he could set up his kingdom. But that wasn't the way it was going to be. And he ends up obviously telling them that before the ascension. But he's setting up a spiritual kingdom. And that's something that we are a part of today. We are a part of that spiritual kingdom. And we're a part of helping him build that kingdom. But he wants fellowship. He wants fellowship with us. And you know, let's say you're in your living room watching TV and you're all alone. Well then, your sister comes in. Your sisters come in. Mm-hmm. Now it's more fun, isn't it? Yeah. Even if you don't talk, you're just watching a TV show. It's just more fun to have somebody there. Well, that's the way it is with God. You don't have to be talking to him when it says pray continually. You don't have to be talking to him every minute of the day, but just being with him. Mm-hmm. That's what he wants. He wants our fellowship. He wants us to want his fellowship. And it's not like we got to be talking all the time. It's just being together and fellowshipping together. In every generation, there's only a few people who come to know the Lord. Matthew 7:13 and 14. This is how we know that. Enter ye in, this is Jesus speaking, at the strait gate, For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth to life, and few there be that find it. So it doesn't matter what generation it is, there's only going to be a few, because the Bible says so. Most people are going to reject it. So when you tell people about Christ, you want to share your faith, most of them are going to reject it. But that's not on you, because we are just planting seed or watering. That can only happen when Christ calls them. And the last verse here, verse 11, and Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land full of great fishes. They weren't just little ones, they were great. 153. And for all there were so many, yet the net was not broken. Because now they're going to be fishing for men. This is a type. And that net is the gospel. So I'm going to close this with a verse from Revelation 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and sup with him. That means dine with him. And he with me. He's a gentleman. He's not going to barge into your heart. He's going to knock and he's going to call your name. And you need to answer. And what's going to happen again? This fellowship. He wants fellowship. And that's what we need. He says, I will dine. And you know, think about it. He had prepared all that food. Here he was serving the disciples again. He was the host and their minister. And you remember when he washed their feet? He was serving them then. He was showing them that the greatest person is the one who is the greatest servant. Okay, that's my message for tonight.